both sides of the house, or if anything, we add benefits. We're crouching close. I thank you for your opposition for remarks. Now call upon the member of government to
Thanks, everyone. I'm very honored to be here. Now, before I get into the points that we get from the leader of the opposition, I want to give an overview about how exactly we feel on our side of the House in advocating Truth and Reconciliation Commission about the war crimes that have occurred. Because what we feel is that those crimes are effectively in the past. They've occurred. There's nothing we can do to bring those individuals back from the dead. And what we have to do now is instead focusing on building a society that can be stable and that can protect our individual citizens. And what I want to say is, we were in a time of war. Lots of people did a lot of really terrible things. We want to hear you come forward, talk about those things, apologize, and try to make restitution. But we don't want that process to be adversarial. Instead, we want to say, that's over. Now we're going to start again. Should you choose to commit any crimes in the future, should you choose not to cooperate and be a part of this new state that we're trying to create, then we'll punish you for things that you may do in the future. But right now, we're granting amnesty for things that have happened already in the past. We're turning the page and we're starting over. And what we're going to do is try to forgive and forget, because at the end of the day, we all have to live with each other. And we need to build a society in which we're committed to getting along, to forgiving each other, and to being able to live together in sort of harmony, fight out, whatever.
Okay, so if some guy comes forward and says, I killed your grandmother, now forgive me, am I going to be likely to move on? Is this going to make me happy?
I'll talk about that a little bit later, when I settle. Alright, so the first thing we hear is, well, there is in fact a possibility for justice when we have war crimes tribunals. And the example we get is, well, the Nuremberg trials. Look how just they were. But in that case, we're talking about World War II. We're not talking about a domestic conflict. There was very little one party that was involved and that committed atrocities against the other side. There was no other side that had committed atrocities, except insofar as you might say, no thank you, that the United States committed some atrocities in fighting World War II, or that the Allied powers did. But did you see their name tried in Nuremberg? No, you didn't. And that's exactly the problem that we're talking about here. We might be able to effectively punish one side, but we're not able to effectively punish the other side. I don't want to be here to say, well, of course you should punish your own side too. You should punish your own political leaders and throw them in jail. That's completely infeasible insofar as it would completely destabilize your regime. You can't afford to say, oh, we made this huge mistake, we're going to punish ourselves just as much as we're punishing the people that we're punishing. What best leads to stability is not choosing to punish anyone. No thanks. We also hear, well, you should call in international help. That was also, incidentally, the first point that the leaders to make his overview or whatever. Call in international help. What we would say is what that does is send a message that you're not powerful enough to punish the people that you've beaten. And essentially what we would say that does, no thank you, is make your regime look weak and destabilize it in the future. It also will make your new regime look as if you are essentially a tool of foreign powers. I would say a lot of countries in the third world, unfortunately, have minorities within them that are strongly opposed to the West, and that would be very upset by feeling like the government of their new country is in bed with the United States, or with the United Nations, which they essentially associate with the West and with Western powers that they don't want having an influence in their country. And I think it would delegitimize the trials themselves to look as if they were overseen by the United States, that the United States was complicit in those somehow, or the United Nations. Next, we get sort of some points about justice and what the point of justice is, I guess. First, he talks about rehabilitation. So we can sort of rehabilitate people through punishment. This is absurd. No one truly believes that we rehabilitate people by punishing them. We punish them because we're angry and because we want to get back at them. And fundamentally, what our case is arguing is that that's the wrong approach to take, when eventually those people are going to get out of jail and have to live in society. What we don't want to do is to encourage the members of our society to be angry and hateful. Instead, we want them to say, yes, it happened, we're angry, but we're going to move beyond it. No thank you. Next, we get the point that, well, there will be instability because we'll be mad when we see these bad people walking the streets and we'll feel like they need to be punished. we acknowledge that that may sometimes be the case. But what I would say, and this is also our response to the POI I took earlier, is that essentially what people want more than anything is just to know what happened. To know what happened to their relatives that disappeared in the middle of the night, whose bodies later turned up in the river. And on their side, we don't get that, because people have an incentive to hide the truth and to fight the justice system because they're afraid of being punished. At least on our side, we get to know what happened. We get to let people have a sense of closure that they can't have on that side. Down here, well, we need to deter future crimes. As I pointed out in my overview, well, we can deter future crimes by pointing out that future crimes will be punished. But we should conserve our resources to punish future crimes that we can maybe prevent, instead of punishing people for crimes that have already happened that we can't stop. Again, we hear about retribution and how great that is. I've already talked about this. We also hear, well, vigilante justice will occur. Vigilante justice, we would argue, will occur more on their side of the house, because people will be extremely angry, no thank you, against the victors, and will be motivated to strike out when they feel like their side is we recognize some vigilante justice, probably more on their side of the house. And finally, this absurd point, send a message that crimes are illegal. Of course, crimes are illegal. We should punish people for committing crimes. But we should say crimes that have already occurred are in the past, and we should conserve our resources to be able to more effectively punish crimes, so thank you, that happen in time. Now, let's go back to what Neil said. First, he talks about justice. That effectively what we have on their side of the house is victor's justice. And the response we get, international oversight. The only way to not have victor's justice would also be to punish your side equally, which would completely undermine your stability. And we will get into the house. Next, Neil talks about sort of the adversarial process, and that it gives an incentive for people to hide the evidence. The truth doesn't come out. The response? Well, that's also the case under TRCs. But in fact, it's not. Because what we do is we give people a positive incentive to come forward. We say, if you admit what you did, then you won't be punished for it. If they hide what they did, then they have to accept the fact that they may be punished later on. The next thing Neil tells you is that you have a right, essentially, to a speedy trial, and that TRCs can proceed more quickly because we have people sort of cooperating. They never respond to them. Also, incidentally, I would point out under this idea of sort of wanting to hide the evidence, that in a lot of these regimes, they're completely unstable, and we have no effective means of compelling people to come forward and cooperate with TRCs. So we have to give them some positive incentive to come forward and cooperate, and we do that in the form of amnesty. And finally, Neil talks about, look, it's infeasible to try the most powerful, not like, as I already pointed out, because we simply don't have the resources to make them come forward and comply, but also because it creates martyrs. They never responded to this. That by simply punishing the people that we've conquered, we make martyrs out of the leaders of those groups. And that is why we can make even more injustice, like in line with this the whole sort of ethos that we're going to have on their side of the house, of wanting to punish people and wanting to get revenge. Next, we sort of talk about, peace. And that you have sort of an amicable process on our side of the house, whereas on their side of the house, we have people punishing each other. The response we get, TRCs don't punish anyone. Yes, that's the point. We don't want to punish anyone because we realize, for all the reasons I've talked about, that it's a bad idea. And finally, Neil sort of talks about stability. We don't get any response to the last point, and I want to close on something that's very important. Civil servants. We can't afford to punish civil servants in countries like this, because a lot of times, we don't have people who are educated in these countries. Often we don't even have people who can read. So what we need to do is to forgive those civil servants so that the government can continue to have stability in the future.
I thank the member of government for remarks, and I'll call upon the member of opposition to conclude the constructive phase of the round.
Here, here. Okay, thank you very much for Princeton running a fantastic tournament. Thank you, Alex, you're a great partner. Thank you to everybody watching, and thank you, of course, to state government for a fantastic game in the law. The first thing I want to talk about is kind of the moral authority of the new regime. Because if you are starting a new regime, you have to create a situation which you have some kind of moral authority, which you can say, this is right and this is wrong. In fact, you're going to have to create new laws that people are going to have to follow in the future. So what kind of moral authority are you getting by essentially saying, well, anything that happened in the past, we simply can't prosecute because we don't have the moral authority to do so. Essentially what you're saying is, if you killed millions of people in the past, that's okay, just confess to it and we'll let you go. However, if you jaywalk from now on, we're putting you in jail. Okay? I think that essentially these Truth and Reconciliation Commissions are like a tantamount to a complete giving up of all moral authority. Essentially, you're saying, we were so bad in the past that we can't even say that genocide in the past was wrong. We do not have the moral authority to do this. I think that that's morally bad. But what does Kate get out of her and tell us? She says, look, but these things happened in the past. That's true. All crimes happened in the past, but also doing after we prosecute. What are we supposed to do? Prosecute crimes that haven't happened yet? Like, we think that that's a little bit silly. But let's talk about the observation that Alex brings up, because it's very important. He says, look, we don't necessarily have to be stupid about this, right? Like, if we don't have any civil servants whatsoever, we'll just draw the line higher and only prosecute, like, the generals and the president. Whoever else was, like, distinctly responsible for what happened, right? Like, don't prosecute the little fish, contrary to what they're saying. Furthermore, we don't have to go ahead and say, well, we don't have any lawyers, so we're just going to kind of try to make this happen, like in Rwanda. We're just going to put everybody in these huge prisons and just kind of see if it works. Ask for international help. We think that, like, clearly a lot of these international organizations are going to be like, well, these people committed genocide in the past, and we'll give you some lawyers to help you prosecute. Yes?
Yeah, Rwanda's run by an international body, Alex. It's failed.
Okay, like what? Well, it went wrong in Rwanda, therefore it's going to go wrong everywhere else, right? Like, I think that they have 19 lawyers in Rwanda. I think that's not a necessary condition of what's going to happen here. I think it's a little bit of use of uncivility on their side of the house. What does Alex tell you? He says, look, this whole victor's trials mentality is a little bit silly. These tribunals can actually be pretty damn just. He gives an example of the Nuremberg tribunals. We get two responses. First of all, well, the Nuremberg tribunals, clearly one side was wrong, and that's never going to happen in any kind of ethnic conflict. Why, right? Like, I think in Rwanda, there was pretty clearly one of the sides was pretty damn wrong, right? Like, one side was slaughtering the other. Sure, the other side did some bad things. That doesn't mean that these guys don't have to be punished for it. But what is the other brilliant argument we get? Sure, we punished the Nazis, but we didn't also punish the Americans, who may also have committed war crimes. And maybe that's true. But that's no reason to let off the Nazis, right? It's still good to punish the Nazis. Why don't we let them off, right? So the next thing we say is, Alex gives the point about the international help. So get international help. And we get a fantastic response. We say, if you ask for international help, then you're not going to look strong enough to punish them. Well, guess what? That's their case. Look too weak to punish them, right? Because they're not offering any kind of way of punishment on our side. They're saying on their side of the house, let them go, because you don't have the moral authority to punish them. Sure.
Yeah, the international community didn't think that the South African government after apartheid was too weak after it had TRC to deal with that conflict.
What we're talking about is the people who actually live in the country, right? The people who live in the country, when they see these people not being punished, when they see their new government saying, oh, we're just going to let them off as soon as you confess to what you did, that's going to look pretty damn weak. Understand? They're like, oh, we only punish a few people. They're punishing nobody on their side of the house. What is the next thing Alex does? He talks to you about the various purposes of punishment that we're getting and they're failing. First of all, he talks about rehabilitation. He says, look, like, sometimes we believe that the reason we punish people is because after we punish them, they're going to be rehabilitated. They'll think about what they've done. Possibly they'll become a better person. What is the argument that we get in response to this? This is absurd and nobody believes this. Of course, this isn't actually an argument, right? Like, many people actually do believe in rehabilitation. There is reason to believe that if you're put in prison because something you did was wrong, you're going to think for a while about why it is that what you did was wrong, and possibly you will become rehabilitated. The next thing we talk about is incapacitation. Because we're like, some of these people are pretty damn bad, right? Like, they're war criminals. They're out there with their, like, machetes or whatever, and possibly it might be bad to have them just walking the street. It might create some damage, right? What does Kate do? She concedes this argument, and she just tries to shift it, right? She admits that incapacitation is a good thing and they're not getting it on their side of the house. Understand that if you let these people go, it's not like they're just going to disappear. They're going to try to reinsert themselves into the political life of the country. Much like Slobodan Milosevic, who's being prosecuted quickly, his party just essentially won the election to serve in parliament, right? So we don't want that. We don't want the people who have recently committed essentially genocide to continue to participate in the political life of the country, essentially doing it through possibly violent means. But what is the argument that we do get in this? The argument that we get is, we don't really care about punishing them. That's not what we want. What we really want is we want to know what happened. First of all, that's not really the case. I don't just want to know who killed my grandmother. I want the person who killed my grandmother to be punished, right? I don't think that once I find out who did it, I'll just be like, oh, well, it's that guy and he's apologized for it. Everything's fine. Like, no, that's not really how it works. We want other things as well. Also, I really contest their idea that on our side of the house, we simply can't find out what happened. Understand that, like, in our trials, in our system, we use the adversarial process. And we think it's a pretty damn good way of figuring out what happened. Understand that if I have the chance to find out and prosecute who killed my grandmother, I'm going to have a pretty good incentive to look for those documents and prove in a court of law who did it, right? Understand that they're not creating the same incentive. The only incentive they're creating is for the murderer to come forward and say, oh well, I did it and now I go free. We create different incentives, and I would argue better incentives. Finally, we talk about deterrence. Because once again, if I know who killed my grandmother, if he came forward and said it, and absolutely nothing happened to him, I'm certainly going to be moved to vigilante justice. I'm certainly going to be moved to essentially kill that person. And they say that they actually get more of that in our side of the house because people are somehow going to lash out against justice. And I really don't think that's true. I think that what people are really going to get angry at, I think what's really going to upset people, is precisely the fact that the people who did kill their grandparents, who did essentially decimate their tribe or their ethnicity, are going completely free. That's not going to make people happy. They're certainly going to be more violent on their side. Let's go back to the extent. The first thing they talk about is this whole idea of justice, right? And essentially they say, like we say that, like, first of all, victors, like, essentially they talk about victors' justice. And the first thing we would tell you is essentially these tribunals, like the things that they're offering on their side of the house, the reconciliation commissions, are essentially a form of victor's justice. Because all these like high up, big important people are going to say, well, we're not actually going to have tribunals, we're just going to have these reconciliation commissions. And everybody else who actually wants a tribunal is not going to get their wishes met. Essentially, this is a form of victor's justice. But also we say, look, make it more objective. Get international help. And once again they say, the only argument that we get here is, sure, even if you get international help, there's no way you're going to punish yourself. The first thing we're going to say is, even if you don't punish yourself, like we said, like there's no reason to let the Nazis do. But furthermore, there's no reason that you don't necessarily punish yourself, right? If your soldiers did something wrong, why don't you go ahead and get international help, have an objective tribunal, and punish your soldiers as well? I see no reason whatsoever why you wouldn't do this. That's why our trials are adversarial. We say, good, now people are going to strive to find the truth. They say that they give the incentive when we do not. I already dealt with that. But they talk about like, once again, they say like, Rwanda went badly. Once again, like, Rwanda is a really extreme example. We think the international community can help. Okay. The next thing they say is only the low people will get tried. No big fish will ever get tried under any circumstances. First of all, once again, I simply don't understand why that's true. I don't understand why the martyrdom effect is all of a sudden the most important argument possible. If these people are so compelling that they will become martyrs and rally people around their cause, why would we want to leave them alive so they can continue to get nothing within the ground? Furthermore, what I would tell you is, like, you can still get the important people, and because it's really important to punish them. Like, there are other causes than just martyrdom. But furthermore, what I would tell you is that, like, even if we're already getting the small fish, at least we're getting somebody, right? They're getting absolutely nobody on their side of the house. Once again, they talk about maintaining peace. We talk about how essentially, like, you can get this with international help. We talk about how the stability is a problem on both sides. And then the only argument that we get in response to this is that, oh, well, we have to clearly punish all the civil servants and all the lawyers. Once again, we don't have to do this a stupid way. Remember that argument. If we need, like, lawyers and civil servants to accomplish what we need to do, don't punish them. Punish the big fish. Punish the important people. We're very proud. Let's go
I thank the member of opposition for his remarks. Now call upon the leader of opposition to deliver a formal proposal.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I'd like to start off with the Nuremberg example here, because we present you the Nuremberg example as an exemplar of when this was actually a just or punished tribunal. The only distinction we hear from Kate between Nuremberg and everything else that they are purporting exists on their side of the house is that Nuremberg was international and clearly something wrong happened. We would say that even within the domestic level, even if something takes place only in one country, sometimes we can say that something is clearly wrong. Like, I don't understand why something is clear only if it happens at the international level. I just don't think that this distinction Kate tries to draw is a valid one. We would say that as soon as Kate concedes that bad things are clearly wrong, you should punish those things which are clearly wrong. She actually concedes that to us. But on top of that, she doesn't actually say that Nuremberg was carried out badly. She doesn't say this was a bad case of victor's justice. She doesn't say that the United States and the rest of the international community did this the wrong way. She concedes that in certain cases it can be done right. We didn't hear any argument to that effect, and I think that that's pretty problematic for them to concede these points. Let's crystallize. The first thing that I'd like to talk about is moral authority. I think that Alex really sums it up well in his speech. That if the government doesn't have the ability to carry out justice, then it doesn't have any moral authority whatsoever. If it can't send the message that something is clearly wrong, then what moral authority then does it have? Also, we would tell you that it should have the moral authority to uphold laws in the past. Like, not just punishing crimes in the past, because all crimes have to be punished after the fact, but also to uphold laws of decency and laws that should apply in society. Like, are they going to forgive debts? Are they going to nullify marriages because they took place in the previous regime? I don't think so. The current regime does have moral authority to uphold the law. I think that's pretty important. Once you say that a society doesn't have the ability to punish people. The message that you're sending is that people who live in a society right now do not have any guarantee of protection. Because if somebody commits genocide again, then that's going to be a problem for people who simply be let off the hook. That undermines the legitimacy of any government that is supposed to be protecting people. Like, the Lockean argument is the only reason we grant a monopoly of force to the government so that they can protect us. I just don't think that we're going to be doing that if we undermine the moral legitimacy of the government. The second thing that I want to talk about is punishment. First of all, we have flexibility in whom we'd like to punish. Like, we can punish the big fish, we can punish the little fish. We don't really have to go for the rubber stampers. We can choose the level that we want. But also, I tell you about the reasons for punishment and how every single one of them is important. We tell you about rehabilitation. Kate simply asserts, nobody believes that punishment rehabilitates anybody. I'm sorry, that is not a sufficient response. They have to provide analysis as to why that is not the case. We tell you why it is the case. They don't respond to that. We tell you about incapacitation. We tell you that that's something that you don't want war criminals walking around the streets. But I'll get to that later on. We also tell you about deterrence, how you can deter people in the future. They don't even make the argument in MG that war generals are not rational actors. Like, they ask this in a POI, I respond to it thoroughly, and then they don't even bring it back up in the MG. What we would say is that there's both direct deterrence and indirect deterrence, especially when people don't want to be punished, and they don't respond to this point. And finally, with retribution, they simply assert that we're going to have more vigilante justice on our side of the house than theirs. What we would say is that if you're putting murderers behind bars, victims' families are less likely to want to go out there and to kill these people. That is more likely to be towards vigilante justice than on their side of the house. The point on which I'd like to close is that of stability. We would say that if war criminals are walking the streets, that society is very unlikely to be just and is very unlikely to be stable. What we'd rather have those who would be martyrs because they're so charismatic dead, or would we have them alive so that they could use their charisma to round up support and perhaps topple the regime that's supposed to be legitimate in the first place? If these new regimes have any interest whatsoever, we think that that's pretty important. Also, we would tell you that these former war criminals can continue to have lasting impact. All we have to do is look at Serbia, look at political parties, when we punish people, and ensure that we wipe out the roots of evil which have existed in society in the past. That's the only way we're going to have a true society. And then one final point. They talk about, like, amnesty, right? One that concedes that this new regime has the moral legitimacy to grant amnesty, but, like, what if somebody doesn't come forward and then you find out? Like, do you punish them then? Like, either it's amnesty or it's not. If they decide not to come forward and then you catch them, you can't punish them because you don't have the moral legitimacy. Yeah, that was a new point, but I thought it was cute anyway.
Leader of opposition for admitting that he was obviously breaking the rules and calling on the Prime Minister.
Kate and I advocate truth and reconciliation commissions because we believe that these societies that just underwent some type of violent domestic conflict, need to have a question of balancing their values. We think it's a question of saying, look, we want justice, but we want justice such that we can further the stability of our nation, such that we can move on, so that we can promulgate justice in the future, that we can have a civil service in the future, that we can have a decent criminal justice system, that we can do it quickly, that we can do it cheaply. We think that what we give you on our side of the house is the way to get justice for individuals involved with the atrocities that occurred, but to also allow for stability so that this country can move on. Realize on that side of the house, when they're going around punishing people, but then are willy-nilly in who they decide to punish, as the member of opposition concedes, saying, we can be flexible, they concede the idea of justice. And when we talk to you about the fact that we get stability on our side of the house, and they give you no reason why punishing people breeds stability, we think we need The opposition in today's round is overly idealistic and not grounded in reality. It's based off intuition. It's based off of, wouldn't you like the killer of your grandmother to have gone to jail? Yeah, you would have liked it unless you don't know who the killer of your grandmother was because they were burning documents so that they wouldn't be persecuted in a court of law. You don't get that on that side of the house. You don't get due process. You don't get documentation. You don't get discovery on that side of the house because people have a specific incentive to not come forward and to compete against the adversarial system. That's why war tribunals are wrong. That's why we want truth. And that's why we think that we win today's round. I have 3 questions I want to ask you. I want to ask, what is justice? I want to ask, what do people want? And I'm going to ask, how do countries move forward? What is justice? They simply assert that justice is putting people behind bars. They simply assert that justice is saying, you were bad, you're naughty, we're going to find against you and put you away. Justice doesn't have to be that, and we give you an alternate view of what justice can be. We tell you justice can be giving reparations so that the families of those who had atrocities committed against them can now actually move on within society. We tell you that justice can be the idea of punishing people equally and not just one half of the group involved. War crime tribunals send the message that crimes are illegal, but it sends the message that only half of the crimes that were committed are illegal. We tell you justice is punishing people equally. You can punish everybody in a Truth and Reconciliation Commission by advocating for reparations to all of the people who had atrocities. But then they talk to you about, well, we can punish either the civil service or we can punish the leaders. Recognize that on that side of the house, we think it's problematic to just pick and choose who you're going to punish. But then they say, well, let's not punish the civil service because we realize that we need them to run the government. Let's just punish the big dogs. They respond to Kate's excellent analysis about the idea of martyrdom by saying, no, when they're out on the streets, they're better able to mobilize people. People are galvanized when they see their political leader being persecuted by the state. That's what gets people involved. When people saw in the civil rights movement, when they saw government officials going against their leaders, that's what rallied people around the cause. That's what got people to actually believe that what they were doing was correct. We think that's important. People are rallied more on that side of the house. That's what the idea of martyrdom is in the first place. You feel that this person is something good because they were a martyr for the cause. But then we tell you that justice is also justice for all of those involved and not just half of them. They tell you we can have international bodies involved. Rwanda had an international body. They never told us why Rwanda was flawed. Rwanda followed all of the tenets that they decided to, but the problem with Rwanda was that it was run by the international body. The magic number is 19, Mr. Speaker, members of this panel. 19 convictions in 10 years. That's a problem that we're not willing to defend. The second question I want to ask is, what do people want? People want truth. People want to know what happened. People want to know that their loved ones were killed and are not being held in a camp somewhere so they can put and allow for closure. People want to allow for the fact that something actually happened and they want to know who actually committed that act. If they don't know what went on, there's no closure in that society and they can't progress at all. People don't want international help, as they tell you in the opposition, because they feel that the international organizations are affiliated with the West, and they want to move on as a country itself, and they don't want the international biases and influence coming in. They tell you about moral authority. Mr. Speaker, members of this panel, why is jailing people automatically allowing for moral authority? But further, I would ask you, how do you get moral authority if you're not punishing your own cronies because they're easy to elect the government? And how are you going to have moral authority in your government when the people who killed their relatives are not going to jail because of the fact that you decided not to try them because they were on your side of the party? We think that's problematic, and we don't think that's something that you should allow for. The final question I want to ask you is, how do countries move forward? They move forward by closing the chapter on what happened. The state of war is not the state of peace. You need to make concessions. You need to figure out what's going on. You need to do something that you wouldn't normally do in a state of peace. We think countries also do it by doing it in a timely manner and by doing it cheaper so they can expend their resources in a better manner in the future. Look, in World War II, Americans committed atrocities that they were never tried for under the Nuremberg Tribunal. That's because victor's justice took place. The fact of the matter is we believe that societies have two main things they need to take into account. They need to get the truth, and they need to move on as a society. For those reasons, Kate and I are strongly involved.